Let's go ahead and put this up on the screen. So a new World Bank paper warns of a global recession if central banks continue to jack up interest rates, as the Federal Reserve seems poised to do. So when you dig into this, what they're pointing out is the fact that almost unprecedented, very unusual historic situation is unfolding, in which it's not just our country that is having central bank hiking interest rates. This is happening in almost, every nation around the world. This is really a global phenomenon. So you have everybody around the world tightening the screws of monetary policy. It's hard to predict what that outcome is actually going to be. So they model 3 different scenarios, and in one of them, where everybody continues to tighten the screws, it leads to a severe global recession, especially when you consider the fact that there are a lot of recession warning signs here. By some metrics, as we've discussed before, we're already in a recession. And as we're about to discuss, you also have China with significant financial difficulties because of their COVID-0 policy, because they have sort of the music has stopped in terms of the housing market there. That has been a huge boon to their economy. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But the fact that you have the US and China as these big weights in terms of the global economic system means that you could have a really, really ugly situation. Let me just read a tiny bit from this report. So they have a quote here from one person who says, the odds of recession in Europe, the US, and China are significant and increasing. A collapse in one region will raise the odds of collapse in the others. The risk of a global recession trifecta are rising by the day. They also say the global economy is in the midst of one of the most internationally synchronous episodes of monetary and fiscal policy tightening of the past 5 decades. So that's what I was just saying, the fact that all of these countries are paring back spending and also hiking interest rates at their central bank. That means you have this global phenomenon of monetary and fiscal policy tightening. They go on to say these policy actions are necessary to contain inflationary pressures, but their mutually compounding effects could produce larger impacts than intended, both in tightening financial conditions and in steepening the growth slowdown. This synchronous policy tightening contrasts with the policies adopted around the 1975 global recession, but is similar to those implemented ahead of the 1982 recession. So that's what they really say is unusual right now, is that everybody is sort of acting in concert here, and it's hard to say what that ultimately is going to mean.
Yeah, I mean, we're the most globalized economy in the history of the world, obviously. It happens every single year.
True.
And we had a global recession in the 1900s, so early, almost 100 years ago. So the idea that we can't have contagion across world markets is already been dispelled several times over. Now we already have economic precarity in China. We have economic precarity and geopolitical instability in Europe. I was just reading a piece yesterday. European factories all across the continent are going dark because they simply cannot afford the energy bills.
Wow.
Well, what does that mean? Europe is a hub of manufacturing, especially high-tech manufacturing, Germany especially. Their trade surpluses relied on their manufacturing powerhouse. Well, what happens? Well, we've already seen. We've had a trade deficit in the first time in modern German history. What does that mean? Because that backstops the euro, their financial system, the entire continent owes loans, in this very complex trading scheme, which is basically a German trading house, backed up by the other nations in Europe. What exactly does it mean whenever you have prolonged actual manufacturing recession and high energy prices? The UK, obviously things over there are a disaster. There are energy inflation, food crisis. They're literally an island, as we've found out several times in history. Japan, I was just reading this morning, Japan is forecasted to have one of the coldest winters in modern history. That is going to mean that they're going to have to jack up LNG prices to sky high because they're Japan also. Why did we start a war? Why did they start a war with us in World War II? Because they didn't have oil and they don't have any natural resources. So they need to buy a ton of LNG in order to heat their homes, which means then what? India recently had to pay double the price in LNG for the first time on modern markets because they needed it, an emergency backstop to their grid. So these are all the downstream effects, which is that India, Japan, even India is a poor nation, but, large economies that can afford it, they'll be fine. There's many countries which can't afford it at all, which means they're going to be burning coal, wood, God forbid. That's already happening in Africa and elsewhere. So this is downstream catastrophic effects of which everything is interconnected.
We talked before, too, about how our monetary policy has ripple effects around the globe in terms of developing markets, and it makes it more expensive for them to pay back their dollar-denominated debts. So that's another sort of cascading ripple effect. So, yeah, when you have everybody basically around the world tightening up, both lowering spending, increasing their interest rates at the central bank. We don't know what impact that is going to have, but the World Bank is warning that it could lead to a global recession if we continue to head in this direction. So that's what they're raising the alarms about.
I got a book recommendation. It's called Lords of Finance, The Bankers Who Broke the World. It was written in December 2009, and it's specifically a monetary history of the Great Depression. I can never, it's like Liaquat Ahmed, I think. His name won the Pulitzer Prize that year. Yeah, I read it recently. It's a fantastic book. A lot of what I'm talking about comes from there.
Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.